The biggest regret of my life was turning back to look during that blizzard, because I saw a trail of footprints in the snow. Not a bear's, not a human's, not any animals. Each footprint was nearly 6 feet long, and the deepest ones punched straight through the frozen ground. But here's the thing, there was nothing around. The wind was howling. Our thermal imager showed a blank screen. Couldn't even pick up a rabbit. Yet over the radio, there was a constant sound of breathing. Heavy, like something enormous was right behind us, panting against our backs. Thomas was about to speak when the Black Hawk helicopter above us suddenly jolted hard. I looked up instinctively, and I saw it, a massive gray-white hand. It reached out from the blizzard and pressed directly onto the cockpit. When that gray-white giant palm slammed into the helicopter's windshield, the sound was louder than thunder. I was standing right below it, just 6 feet from the landing gear. I watched as that bulletproof reinforced glass shattered into countless glittering shards in a single second, like a kid stomping on a bag of crackers. The pilot and co-pilot had nowhere to go. That hand was too wide, covering the entire front of the cockpit. It shoved forward hard, and in an instant, 2 living people, along with their metal seats, were crushed into a thin sheet. They were pinned against the rear bulkhead of the cockpit. I couldn't see details, just 2 dark, human-shaped silhouettes pressed flat, motionless. The blizzard howled in my ears. The massive Black Hawk rotor above was still spinning, the wind kicked up blinding me. My boots were sunk deep into snow up to my knees, and I couldn't pull them out. I craned my neck to look up. The back of that hand was covered in dense barbs, each one as sharp as an animal's fawn. As it exerted force, those barbs scraped against the metal doorframe, making a grating sound that set my teeth on edge. A burst of fire shot out from the helicopter's cabin door, a short circuit igniting. The red flames lit up that hand, and I could finally see its skin, thick as concrete, rough and grainy. It was moving, the palms still pushing inward. The whole helicopter sank under its pressure, the landing skids crunching into the snow, inching closer to my head. I stood there, mouth wide open. The rotor's wind scattered the glass, shards everywhere. Some cut across my face, cold and sharp, but I forgot to even dodge. I stared at that hand. It was huge, too huge to belong to anything on this earth. It was just a little above my head, kneading that multi-ton metal machine like a toy. The air was thick with the smell of burning, mixed with the dull sound of metal being twisted apart. The barbs on the back of that hand kept twitching, as if the hand itself was breathing. People shouting from inside the helicopter cabin, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. The snow was too heavy, the wind too strong. The only thing I could clearly see was that gray-white, concrete-like hand, still pressing the aircraft deeper into the ground. I felt the ground trembling beneath my feet, the vibration traveling up through my knees to my chest. Earlier, when we were walking through the woods, I knew something was off. The forest was too quiet. So quiet it made you want to shout, just to confirm you weren't deaf. I was in the middle of the group, my eyes fixed on the old pine trees on either side. Those trees were twisted and crooked. I got closer and saw that the bark had been scraped off, every single one. The wear marks were high up, about 10 to 12 feet off the ground. The wood fibers were exposed, looking fresh, as if something huge and hard had just rubbed against them. The pale wood underneath gleamed starkly in the gray light. The snow on the ground was strange too. It had been snowing heavily, and the accumulation was deep enough to swallow your thighs. But after walking for so long, we hadn't seen a single footprint. Apart from the holes we made ourselves, the snow only showed one kind of mark. It was a wide, deep groove, like someone had dragged a massive millstone through the snow. That groove stretched deep into the woods, flattening every bush in its path. The radio in my ear kept crackling, but there were no voices, just the sharp, piercing sound of static. That ZZ noise was giving me a headache. I adjusted my headset, and suddenly, another sound mixed into the static. It was a steady, heavy panting, huff, huff, one after another. The sound was so deep, like a massive bellows working furiously. It couldn't possibly have come from a human. I reached down and touched the magazine hanging on my chest. My palm was slick with cold sweat. We finally reached this clearing. The snowstorm had grown fiercer. the wind cutting into our faces like knives. Thomas was running ahead of me when he suddenly stopped, lowering the muzzle of his gun. He raised his arm and pointed toward a large snowdrift up ahead. Behind that pile of snow stood a gray, shadowy thing. It just stood there, motionless in the blizzard. The heavy snow made its outline look fuzzy, its edges blurred. At first glance, it looked like a strangely shaped boulder or a frozen, gnarled tree stump. I switched on the tactical flashlight mounted under my rifle barrel, and a blinding white beam shot straight at the rock. The moment the light hit it, the rock moved. Two impossibly long arms suddenly swung out from its sides, plunging into the snow and tearing it apart with a violent motion. The half-meter thick ice sheet around it shattered, sending ice and snow flying everywhere. It felt like someone had ripped up a carpet, tearing the entire ground snow and ice apart. It didn't make a sound, not a single cry. Slowly, it turned its body toward us, revealing an expressionless face. Its gray-white eyes had no eyelids, and the pupils spun rapidly, fixed intently on us. I felt the snow beneath my feet grow even colder, freezing my legs until they trembled. I can't remember who fired first. Maybe it was me, maybe Thomas, or maybe the terrified little machine gunner behind us. The moment that gray thing turned its head to stare at us, gunfire lit up the snowy ground in a crimson glow. My shoulder went numb from the rifle's recoil as bullets flew from the barrel one after another, striking the thing's chest. The sound was bizarre, no thud of bullets hitting flesh. Amid the intense gunfire, all I heard was a clanging, like dozens of little hammers pounding against a solid slab of iron. My flashlight beam shook violently, but I could see the bullets striking its body, sending sparks flying everywhere. Those sparks stood out starkly in the white blizzard, one after another, illuminating the creature's gray, keratinous shell. It didn't move, just stood there. The bullets hit its thick, cement-like shell, leaving only faint white marks like chalk dots on stone. Its lidless eyes kept spinning rapidly, and even when bullets struck near its eyes, it didn't so much as blink. Suddenly, the creature took a step forward. Its stride was enormous, its backward bending leg slamming hard against the icy ground. I felt the earth tremble violently beneath my feet, snow spraying out on both sides, as if a landmine had exploded in the snow. Its movements were grotesquely uncoordinated, its three-segmented arms swaying loosely, hanging all the way down to its ankles. It swung its right arm, the impossibly long one, in a sudden, lightning-fast motion. I barely saw it, just felt a cold, foul wind sweep past. Thomas was standing to its side, still firing upward at an angle. The creature's bony claw swept horizontally across Thomas's body. I heard a sound like metal pipes being crushed, the sound of Thomas's metal frame and ballistic plates shattering instantly. Thomas flew sideways like a tin can kicked by a professional athlete, soaring several meters through the air before slamming into an ancient pine tree, so thick two people couldn't wrap their arms around it. The tree cracked loudly, its upper half snapping off, and all the snow piled on its branches collapsed, burying Thomas completely in the white, powdery snow. I quickly swung my rifle to aim at the monster's head, but I realized it was already right in front of me. Its speed was completely mismatched with its size. It reached out with its massive, three-fingered hand and grabbed the barrel of my rifle. I tried to wrestle it back, but it felt like trying to pull a heavy tank parked on a slope. I watched as the reinforced metal barrel slowly bent between its three steel pole-like fingers, first into an arc, then creaking and twisting together, until the entire barrel was crumpled into a useless scrap of metal. I let go and stumbled backward, slipping and landing in a snowdrift. The monster's foot was right in front of me, as wide as a millstone, with frozen black mud packed between its toes. It looked down at me, the white marks on its chest from the bullets slowly fading, as if its keratinous hide could heal itself. The machine gunner in the helicopter finally reacted. He leaned out of the cabin door and unleashed a furious barrage of fire. The lines of tracer bullets carved deep trenches in the snow. The monster seemed enraged. It tossed aside the scrap metal and turned toward the helicopter hovering in midair. It opened its mouth, but I heard no cry, only a grinding shriek like metal grinding against steel coming from its throat. Something beneath its skin writhed violently, and from the cracks in its cement-like hide, droplets of deep blue liquid seeped out. It ignored me, crouched low, and used its segmented, elongated arms to crawl toward the helicopter like a giant gray spider. With every movement, the ground cracked beneath it. Sitting in the snow, I watched its broad back, muscles bulging beneath the skin like countless thick steel cables twisting and writhing. Machine gun bullets struck its back, sending sparks flying even higher. One of its arms hooked onto a large rock protruding from the ground, and with a casual grip, it shattered the several hundred-pound stone into fragments. I saw it getting closer to the helicopter, its labored breathing growing louder. Asterisk huff, huff asterisk, each breath pounding against my chest, rattling my nerves. I didn't bother retrieving my rifle. Scrambling on all fours, I crawled toward the edge of the forest. Looking back, I saw the monster leap beneath the helicopter. One of its hands grabbed the landing gear, and with a violent tug, the entire aircraft lurched to the left. The scream of the rotor blades nearly deafened me. I hid behind a pile of rubble, watching the monster's long arm probing the cabin door. Its three bony claws tore through the helicopter's aluminum skin as if it were thin paper, ripping open a massive gash with the slightest effort. Shards of metal flew everywhere, some striking nearby trees and stripping off large patches of bark. The flames grew brighter, casting a ghastly red glow over the snow. I saw the helicopter's door completely deformed as the monster tried to force its entire arm into the cockpit. Screams echoed from inside, accompanied by the screech of metal being forcibly twisted apart. This wasn't a battle. It was like a mischievous boy tearing open a toy box. The snowstorm grew fiercer, blurring my vision. I could see the gray behemoth writhing in the red flames, its silhouette stark against the night filled with the sound of tearing metal. Sparks flew around it in circles like a golden belt, but I knew that behind every spark was a desperate struggle for survival. I lay there in the crevice of the rocks, not daring to breathe. The snow in my hands compacted into ice, its cold seeping through my fingers and into my bones. I watched as the helicopter shook more violently, like a withered leaf trembling in a gale. I knew this was just the beginning. The creature hadn't even exerted its full strength. It was still playing, still testing how tough these metal shells were. That absolute physical power made our rifles feel like water pistols in the hands of toddlers. The machine gun fire from the helicopter's door suddenly ceased. The gun that had been firing desperately moments ago now hung limp, its barrel glowing red and emitting thin wisps of white smoke. The gray giant paused its movements. It released its grip on the landing gear and slowly backed away. Its steps were light, its broad feet making no sound on the snow. It retreated into the thick layers of smoke and snow, vanishing from sight. I lay behind a pile of rubble, gasping for breath in ragged gulps. The frigid air stabbed at my throat like needles. The blizzard around me seemed to ease slightly, and the deafening roar that had filled the air moments before began to fade. The machine gunner leaned halfway out of the cabin door, waving frantically and shouting at the top of his lungs. "Hurry! Get in! It's been driven off!" His voice carried far across the desolate snowfield. He said the thing might just be an unusually large mutated brown bear with thicker skin. I pushed myself up from the ground, my legs still trembling uncontrollably. I inched my way toward the helicopter, step by hesitant step. The cabin floor wasn't far off the ground, and I reached out to grip the metal door frame, my hand coming away sticky. I glanced down at my palm, which was coated in a shimmering substance. The liquid was thicker than glue, its color like blue fluorescent powder mixed into ink. It dripped down the metal seams of the cabin door, and wherever it flowed, the aluminum alloy skin emitted a faint sizzling sound, accompanied by a stream of tiny white bubbles. I leaned in to sniff it. It had no odor, but the brilliant blue shimmered painfully in the firelight, stinging my eyes. I climbed into the cabin and slumped onto the cold floor. The lights inside flickered intermittently, emitting a monotonous hum. I looked around. Thomas still lay motionless in the distant snowdrift, while the metal panels on the cabin walls were all dented inward, exposing a tangle of severed wires. Something strange was happening. I realized the temperature inside the cabin was plummeting rapidly. Logically, with the engine spinning overhead, it should have been warm, but the white mist in my breath grew thicker and thicker, nearly obscuring my face. I glanced out the window and saw that the deep pits left by the creature's footsteps were now emitting an eerie blue smoke. Even more unsettling was the sound. The whirring of the rotor blades had changed. What was once a rhythmic, steady hum had transformed into a dull, grinding noise, like something stirring through mud. I looked up at the ceiling and noticed that the gashes torn by the creature were slowly oozing that same shimmering blue fluid. Instead of dripping down, the fluid crawled along the ceiling toward the rotor shaft. I reached out to touch the cabin wall. Before my fingers even made contact with the metal, a piercing cold shot through them. It wasn't the cold of ice, but a sensation like countless tiny needles drilling into the spaces beneath my fingernails. I saw that the shimmering blue liquid had already spread across the entire ceiling, rapidly hardening into a thick, grainy layer of gray keratin. It grew with alarming speed, as if alive, slowly encasing the aircraft's components. I heard the machine gunner chuckling to himself, saying we'd finally made it. As he spoke, he patted the machine gun in his hands. I looked at his hand and noticed a small smear of the blue fluid on the back of it. The fluid was slowly spreading across his skin, forming a small grayish-white spot. He seemed completely unaware. I turned my gaze toward the cockpit. The two flattened shadows were still pressed against the seats, but I noticed they were slowly beginning to swell. The shimmering blue fluid seeped out from the seams of the seats, gradually reshaping the forms of the two men. Sitting there, my palms slick with sweat, every hair on my body stood on end. The blizzard had truly subsided, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the sound of the fluid crawling across the metal, a grating, creaking noise, like someone crushing ice with their teeth. I knew the creature hadn't gone far. It was just waiting for this blue substance to completely entomb us. The machine gunner was still grinning, reaching for the control stick to try to gain altitude. His movements were stiff, like a rusted tin doll. I saw the grayish-white spot on the back of his hand had grown, now resembling a large, hard shell. He pulled hard on the stick, and the helicopter's engine let out a sharp, unnatural shriek, like someone sawing through metal. The helicopter didn't ascend. Instead, I felt the entire aircraft lurch violently downward. The metal shell of the tail scraped against the frozen, rock-hard ground, producing a series of piercing screeches. Sparks shot out from the seams in the floor, scattering in all directions. I was thrown against the cabin wall, my head striking the newly formed gray keratin. The cold sent a shiver through my entire body. I scrambled on hands and knees to the cabin door and peered out. The creature was crouched right beneath the aircraft. It hadn't run far at all. It had simply been hunkered down in the snow, stirred up by the rotor blades. Now it stood upright, its absurdly long arms gripping the helicopter's landing skids with a deathly hold. Half of its body was buried in the snow, its backward-bending legs acting like massive hydraulic struts, anchoring it firmly to the ground. The muscles in its back writhed violently beneath skin as thick and hard as concrete, like countless steel cables as thick as a wrist twisting and straining inside. I could hear its bones cracking, sharp, snapping sounds. And with each crack, the several-ton Black Hawk helicopter sank another inch into the snow. Its 3 bony claws had already dug deep into the metal, puncturing the reinforced aluminum plates of the skids. Above me, the engine screamed, belching thick black smoke from the exhaust in relentless waves. The instrument panel flickered wildly, bathing the cabin in a harsh, glaring red light. The gunner was still yanking on the control stick, shouting, "Fly, get us up." He was strong, but the stick in his hands was already bent, warped by the gray, keratinous growth sprouting from the back of his hands. The creature hunched lower, its eyes still darting rapidly. With a sudden, violent jerk, I watched the landing gear struts begin to bend. Those sturdy steel tubes seemed as fragile as drinking straws under its strength. The groaning and creaking grew louder, and the cabin floor began to tilt. Left side rising, right side sinking. My fingers, gripping the door frame, felt like they were being torn from their sockets. The helicopter shook violently in place, the engine's scorching exhaust melting the surrounding snow into a ring of dark, muddy slush. But the creature stood unshakably firm, its feet planted on the frozen earth beneath the muck, cracking the ground with its weight. It lifted its head, its expressionless face staring directly at me. From its throat came that grinding, metallic sound, over and over like a machine tool chewing through steel. I saw its other hand rise and clamp onto the helicopter's underbelly. With both hands now gripping the fuselage, the massive Black Hawk resembled a giant dragonfly pinned to the ground by a child. No matter how loudly its wings thrashed, it couldn't budge an inch. The temperature inside the cabin continued to drop. That glowing blue ooze had reached my feet, flowing faster wherever it met the metal seams torn open by the creature. It seemed to move with a will of its own, clumping and crawling toward the helicopter's engine compartment. The rotor's whine grew increasingly strained, the friction turning heavy and rough, as if countless tiny stones were grinding inside the gears. The gunner suddenly fell silent. He stared blankly at his hands. The gray, crust-like growth had now encased his entire forearm. He tried to pull his hand away from the machine gun, but found his skin fused to the metal grip. The keratinous layers spread like roots, creeping along the gun's body and encasing the entire weapon in a rough, concrete-like shell. I looked out the window just as the creature surged with power. It slammed the entire helicopter downward, the fuselage crashing directly onto a protruding rock. With a deafening boom, I felt my whole body shudder, as if about to be shattered. All the lights in the cabin went out, leaving only the flickering glow from engine leaks. I saw the creature release one hand, the massive, barb limb now reaching toward the spinning rotor blades. Shattered glass, shards flew wildly in the wind, cutting fine lines across my face. I noticed the blue ooze beginning to crawl up my boots, a chilling cold seeping through the fabric into my skin. I kicked frantically, trying to shake it off, but it clung stubbornly. All around, there was the muffled sound of metal tearing apart, like someone snapping thick steel bars one after another, right beside my ear. Under the creature's relentless pull, the helicopter's frame had begun to warp, the cabin door now misaligned and impossible to close. The creature crouched in the snow, its breathing growing heavier. Huff, huff. With each breath, it exhaled a cloud of white frost that fogged the helicopter's windows. I saw the helicopter's nose had completely slumped to the ground. The pilot and co-pilot seats had collapsed. Two figures, reshaped and swollen by the ooze, slowly turned their heads. Their necks twisted an impossible angle, a full 180 degrees, and two faces, no longer recognizably human, stared back at me through the shattered windshield. The snow fell even harder. The massive gray creature was now sprawled completely over the aircraft, using its immense weight to pin down the machine that was trying to escape. I could feel the plane sinking bit by bit into the mud, the cabin floor deforming as aluminum alloy panels curled upward as if writhing in agony. My ears were filled with a cacophony of creaking and groaning. I couldn't tell whether it was the sound of the plane or the grating of the monster's keratinous hide. The machine gunner began bashing his head against the gun barrel. His arm, encased in gray keratin, was fused to the machine gun, impossible to pull free. As he slammed his head, he let out a shrill, dry scream, sharp as a chicken with its neck stepped on. With his other hand, the one not stuck, he clawed at his own skin, his fingernails filled with that bright blue mucus, but he couldn't stop, scratching white streaks across the back of his hand. The two remaining soldiers in the cabin had lost their minds. One clutched his rifle and fired wildly at the cabin floor. The deafening rat-tat-tat echoed in the confined space, spent casings bouncing everywhere, pinging off my helmet. He fired while scrambling backward, his heels kicking frantically against the warped aluminum panels. The other soldier had dropped his gun. He pressed himself against the cabin wall, using his teeth to gnaw at the gray, hardened growths sprouting there. The grinding sound of his teeth echoed through the cabin, his lips foaming white from the effort, but he kept biting down, as if trying to devour the plane itself. I lay in the middle of the cabin, watching the floor slowly cave inward. That creaking noise was right beneath my ears. It was a monster's strength, twisting this hunk of metal like a wet towel. I saw the pipes and wiring on the cabin ceiling snap, multicolored wires whipping through the air, sparks flying and sizzling as they struck the blue mucus. The cabin door behind me was completely twisted out of shape. The machine gunner suddenly stopped bashing his head. He turned and began kicking at the gray claw gripping the plane, cursing with every kick, spittle spraying everywhere. The monster's hand shifted slightly, its 3 massive bony fingers giving a gentle squeeze, and the metal frame the gunner was sitting on crumpled like paper. I watched as the gunner was crushed into a tangle of mangled metal. His leg was pinned beneath a deformed ammunition crate, but he seemed to feel no pain. He was still pushing against the gray claw, the blue fluid in his palm fusing with the monster's keratinous hide, making a sound like meat sizzling over a fire. Then, the engine cowling above my head suddenly snapped open with a loud crack. It was a large metal cover, usually tightly sealed. But now, the entire frame of the plane had been twisted by the monster, the latches snapping, sending the cover flying into the blizzard. Looking up, I could see the engine components inside. They were still spinning rapidly, belching black smoke that made me cough. I saw the bright blue fluid had already crept onto the engine blades. The sound of the propeller grew heavy and labored, each rotation causing the entire plane to shudder violently. I knew the aircraft wouldn't hold out much longer. If the monster exerted just a little more force, this hunk of metal would fall apart completely. I reached for the backpack on the floor. My fingers were ice cold and weak. I felt something hard, the last thermite incendiary grenade. It was meant for destroying critical equipment. If ignited, it could burn through steel plates. I gripped it tightly, my sweaty palm making the surface slippery. The soldier, gnawing at the wall, suddenly stopped. He turned to look at me, half his face smeared with the blue mucus. His eyes were wide open, pupils shrunk to pinpoints. He stretched a trembling hand toward me, making a sound like air leaking from a tire. I ignored him. I unbuckled my seatbelt. Just then, the plane tilted sharply again, and I nearly slid across the floor into the gaping hole of the cockpit. I hooked my toes onto a crossbeam on the cabin wall and began inching toward the open engine compartment. A fierce wind blasted through the opening, threatening to lift me off my feet. I saw the monster had straightened up. Its head was dangerously close to the propeller, the wind from the spinning blades blowing all the snow off its body. Its pale gray eyes were fixed on the blades above, as if contemplating where to strike next. I grabbed onto the severed electrical wires, the cords cutting deep into my palms. I crawled to the side of the engine, where the heat was scorching, but I felt no warmth. I looked at the thermite grenade. If I jumped now, the monster would surely crush me underfoot. If I stayed, the plane would soon collapse and bury me alive. The machine gunner was still screaming, his voice already hoarse. I saw that one of his ears was gone, crushed off by the twisted door frame. He was still using his bloody hand to push against the monster's fingernail. I gritted my teeth and slipped the pull ring of the thermite grenade onto my finger. I stared at the back of the monster's head, where a patch of blue, soft flesh was exposed, uncovered by the keratin layer. I took a deep breath of the smoky air and leaned out of the hatch. The wind and snow slammed against my goggles. I saw the monster raise its arm, its 3-segmented limb carving a wide arc in the air. Its target was the axis of the propeller. I could feel all the muscles in its body tighten at that moment, and beneath its cement-like skin came an incredibly heavy, muffled sound. I didn't hesitate any longer. I mustered every ounce of strength I had and crawled toward the deepest part of the engine compartment. I knew the aircraft's fuel lines were connected there. I pulled the pin of the thermite grenade, my mind completely blank. I shoved the small, sparking canister deep into a tangle of intertwined fuel pipes. As soon as I finished, I let go. My entire body rolled toward the hatch along the sloping floor. During the roll, I saw the soldier who had been firing wildly. His gun was empty, but he was still pulling the trigger. Asterisk click, click, asterisk that sound, amid the increasingly loud shattering of the engine, seemed incredibly faint, like someone pinching a piece of dry wood with a fingernail. I rolled to the edge of the hatch, the vast white snowfield right beneath my feet. The monster had already grabbed the propeller shaft. I heard the sound of metal being forcibly torn apart, a noise so loud it drowned out everything else. I closed my eyes and jumped into the snow. I tumbled several times in the snow. Cold snow poured into my collar, chilling me to the bone and making me shiver. I looked up and saw a blinding white flash erupt from the top of the helicopter. The thermite grenade had ignited. The white light illuminated the surrounding snowfield as brightly as daylight. In that burst of light, I saw the gray behemoth. His two hands were still tightly gripping the metal shaft, which it had already half pulled out. The flames reflected off its pale gray eyes, casting a cold, icy gleam. It didn't let go. Instead, it gripped even tighter. I saw more blue ooze seep from between its fingers, rapidly drying and turning black in the white light. The helicopter's fuselage shook violently, like a beast struggling in quicksand. I lay in the snow, watching this scene. My mind was empty, with only that grinding, creaking sound echoing endlessly. I knew this aircraft's time was up, and our lives had only minutes left. As soon as I rolled from the helicopter into the snow, a deafening roar erupted behind my ears, threatening to split my skull. I looked up and saw the gray giant fully straighten its body, its nearly 5-meter-tall frame swaying in the alternating red and white flames. Its two massive hands were now tightly gripping the still rapidly spinning main rotor, the lifeblood of the Black Hawk helicopter. The rotor blades were made of exceptionally tough material, capable of slicing through steel bars when spinning, but now, as they struck the monster's gray-skinned hands, they produced a series of dull, thudding impacts. I saw sparks spraying wildly from between its fingers, as if someone were grinding a sander against its bones. The blades, usually used for flight, were shattered and sent flying everywhere. Some fragments embedded themselves in the tree trunks beside me, slicing through pine trees as thick as bowls in half. The monster's arms, long enough to reach its ankles, suddenly exerted force. Its 3 massive bony claws dug deep into the gaps of the rotor shaft, and the frozen black mud between its fingers shook loose and fell in clumps. The cement-like keratin all over its body ground and compressed, producing a creaking sound louder than thunder. I watched as the metal main shaft connected to the engine was slowly, forcibly pulled out from the top of the helicopter by sheer brute strength. At that moment, the thermite incendiary grenade I had stuffed inside the engine compartment fully ignited. A blinding white fireball erupted from the top of the helicopter, engulfing the monster's chest. It was a fire capable of burning through tanks, yet the monster only swayed slightly. The thick gray granules on its chest glowed red hot, sizzling and emitting pungent blue smoke. With a sudden violent effort, the entire main rotor shaft snapped with a sharp crack. The monster lifted the now still massive rotor as if it were a broken toy windmill and casually flung it aside. The several hundred-pound metal object whistled through the air before crashing into the snow, slamming 2 soldiers who hadn't managed to escape, along with the cabin door, deep into the mud. I watched as the helicopter's aluminum alloy floor curled up like paper, with broken pipes and wires scattered everywhere. The monster turned its head, its lidless grayish-white eyes darting rapidly in the firelight before finally locking onto me. It bent down, pushed off the snow with its reverse-jointed legs, and shot toward me like a gray cannonball. I quickly grabbed a shotgun from the ground and fired at its head. The bullet struck its solid, granite-like forehead, sparking a few flashes of light, but leaving not even a dent. It closed in on me, and with a swift swing of its barbed hand, it slammed into the rubble barricade beside me. The several hundred-pound stones shattered into powder under the impact, the debris striking my goggles and leaving me dazed. I slid down the snowy slope, my gun now empty. I saw the monster pick up a millstone-sized rock and hurl it toward me. The rock grazed my helmet and crashed into the cliff behind me, shaking the entire mountainside and sending ice shards raining down. The soldier, whose face was covered in slime, crawled out of the cabin, clutching a bundle of explosives and shouting incoherently. He stumbled and collided with the monster's leg. The monster glanced down, flicked him into the air with its three-toed foot, and the explosives detonated mid-air. Red flames scorched the monster's back black, but it didn't even flinch. Its three-segmented arm swung toward me again, hooking my ankle. I felt an iron-like force pulling me back, my boots carving deep grooves into the ice. I kicked desperately, jabbing the remaining half of the gun barrel into the gaps between its fingers. A bright blue liquid oozed from the gaps, dripping onto my pants and immediately emitting a plume of white smoke. That bone-chilling sensation returned, as if thousands of ice needles were piercing my flesh. I saw its muscles twisting like steel cables beneath its skin, a prelude to it tearing me apart. At that moment, the helicopter's fuel tank was breached by thermite. An explosion louder than anything before erupted, shattering the entire Black Hawk helicopter into countless burning fragments. The massive shock wave sent the monster lurching forward, and its grip loosened. Seizing the opportunity, I scrambled and rolled into a narrow crevice in the rocks. The rocks above the crevice groaned under the force of the explosion, and large chunks of snow crashed down, burying half my body. Peering through the gaps in the snow, I saw the monster rise from the sea of flames. Its gray keratinous shell was cracked in many places, the bright blue liquid flowing down its legs and staining the surrounding snow an eerie color. It didn't pursue me. Instead, it stood beside the burning wreckage, extending its tongue to lick the blue liquid from its palm. Its body appeared towering in the firelight, its shadow stretching deep into the forest. The air was filled with the crackling of burning metal and the teeth-grating sound of twisting steel. The machine gunner was silent now, crushed beneath a massive piece of the helicopter's wing. The snow was littered with dark, gaping holes, each 2 to 3 meters wide, marks left by the monster's leaps. Crouched in the crevice, I heard the monster emit one last grinding, metallic screech. It turned and dragged its unnaturally long arm, step by step, into the still smoking snow mist. With each step, the ground trembled, until the heavy footsteps were completely swallowed by the wind and snow. I lay on the cold stone, gasping air thick with the smell of gunpowder and coal. My hands were still trembling, the blue slime in my palm now dried into a gray, hard crust. I looked at the completely wrecked Black Hawk, a machine that had been flying just moments ago, now reduced to a smoldering pile of twisted metal. There wasn't a single living soul left around me, only the howling wind in my ears. The snow fell heavier and heavier, gradually burying the still smoking wreckage of the helicopter. I braced myself against the crevice of a rock and slowly stood up, my leg aching terribly. I looked down. The left leg of my pants was completely torn open, and several patches of gray, hardened skin were stuck to my calf. These patches had already grown into the flesh. I tried picking at them with my fingers and found them as hard as stone, impossible to remove. The snow-covered ground was littered with metal fragments. I walked over to where the helicopter had crashed and stepped on something hard. Crouching down, I brushed away the snow and found half a machine gunner's steel helmet. The helmet was completely flattened, with 3 finger-sized holes punched through it. The edges of the holes were neatly bent inward, as if melted through by a hot iron rod. Beneath a pile of crushed aluminum alloy panels, I saw a hand. It was Thomas's hand, his sleeves still stained with that bright blue liquid. The liquid had now frozen into sparkling ice crystals, gluing his fingers to the rocks on the ground. I tugged hard on his arm, only to hear a crisp snap. The frozen, brittle bone broke clean off. I looked up in the direction the creature had gone. The snow bore a trail of astonishingly large pits. None showed any toe marks, just 3 bottomless, circular holes. The snow around these holes had turned a dark blue, still emitting a faint, cold vapor. The wind died down, and the forest returned to its deathly silence. I tightened the tattered bag on my back, its metal clasps lightly clinking against my bulletproof vest. I glanced at the large pine tree that had been snapped earlier. A torn piece of cloth hung from the broken trunk, our squad's flag. I turned and began dragging my leg, now covered in gray, hardened patches, slowly making my way out of the woods. With each step, the gray lumps on the wound ground against the flesh beneath. I glanced at my watch. The face was shattered, the hands frozen at the moment of the explosion. Apart from my footprints, only those enormous circular holes marked the ground. I moved slowly, the firelight behind me growing dimmer. I spotted a rifle barrel twisted like a rope lying in the snow. Clear fingerprints were pressed deep into the steel, each indentation sinking deeply into the metal. I kept walking, never looking back. The snow in the forest continued to fall, burying all the shattered parts, the crushed helmets, and those blue ice crystals beneath the endless white. I left the clearing behind, and no sound followed.